I was standing in my driveway at 6 in the morning with a propane torch in my hand when I saw Patricia Davidson's face appear in her window across the street, and I knew I was about to have a very long day ahead of me. The February blizzard had dumped 2 feet of snow on our suburban Colorado neighborhood outside Denver the night before, and my driveway was completely buried. I had an important meeting downtown at 9, and my snowblower had died halfway through last winter. Being a licensed pyrotechnics expert for Jefferson County meant I had access to equipment most people did not, and using a propane torch to melt the ice patches under the snow was perfectly safe when you knew what you were doing, which I did. I had been doing controlled burns and handling explosive materials for county events for the past 15 years. The torch hissed as I methodically cleared a path, the ice turning to water and running down into the street drain. It was efficient, fast, and completely within my rights on my own property. I was wearing proper safety gear, had a fire extinguisher nearby, and knew exactly what I was doing. The technique was common among professionals who needed quick ice removal without the back-breaking labor of shoveling or the expense of heated driveway systems. Patricia's front door slammed open before I even finished clearing half the driveway. She came marching across the street in her pink bathrobe and fuzzy slippers, her highlighted blonde hair still in curlers, clutching her phone like it was a weapon. She was the president of the Meadowbrook Hills Home Owners Association, a position she took more seriously than most people took actual jobs. "Isaac Jameson, what on earth do you think you are doing?" she shrieked, her voice cutting through the quiet morning air like a knife. I turned off the torch and lifted my safety goggles. "Good morning, Patricia. I am clearing my driveway. How are you this fine morning?" Her face was already red, whether from the cold or anger I could not tell. "You cannot use a blowtorch in a residential neighborhood. This is absolutely unacceptable. You are creating a safety hazard and violating at least a dozen HOA regulations. It is a propane torch, not a blowtorch, and I am using it safely on my own property," I said calmly. I had dealt with Patricia enough times to know that getting emotional would only make things worse. I have a meeting downtown in 3 hours, and this is the fastest way to clear the ice. I do not care if you have a meeting with the president himself. This is dangerous, reckless, and completely inappropriate for our community. What if children see you doing this and try to copy it? What if you start a fire? What if the flames spread to neighboring properties? I glanced around at the 2 feet of snow covering everything in sight. "Patricia, everything is covered in snow and ice. There is literally nothing that could catch fire right now, and I am a licensed professional. I do this for a living. I do not care what you claim to do for a living. This is a clear violation of Section 47. Subsection C of the Meadowbrook Hills HOA Guidelines, which states that no resident shall engage in hazardous activities that could endanger the safety or property values of the community. You will be receiving a fine in the mail, and if you do not cease this activity immediately, I will call the police." Section 47, subsection C refers to the storage of hazardous materials, not the use of standard equipment for property maintenance, I replied. I had read the HOA guidelines cover to cover when I moved in 5 years ago, specifically because I knew Patricia would be looking for any excuse to fine me. We had never gotten along, mainly because I refused to attend the mandatory monthly meetings that always seemed to be scheduled when I was working county events. That is your interpretation. As HOA president, my interpretation is what matters. You have been warned. She turned on her fuzzy heel and marched back to her house, already typing furiously on her phone. I sighed and turned the torch back on. I was not going to let Patricia's power trip make me late for my meeting. The fire chief was one of my regular contacts for county events, and if there had been any actual safety issue with what I was doing, he would have told me years ago when I first started using this method. By 7:30, my driveway was clear, and I was showered and dressed in my truck, heading downtown. The meeting went well. We were planning the 4th of July celebration for the county, which was one of the biggest events of the year. As the lead pyrotechnics coordinator, I was responsible for designing and executing the fireworks display that would be seen by over 50,000 people. The meeting ran long, discussing safety protocols, backup plans, and the new drone integration we were testing this year. I did not get home until nearly 6 that evening. Sitting in my mailbox was a certified letter from the Meadowbrook Hills Home Owners Association. I opened it standing right there in the driveway, the cold evening air making my breath visible. The letter informed me that I was being fined $500 for reckless endangerment of community property and violation of safety protocols, as outlined in the Meadowbrook Hills HOA covenant, conditions, and restrictions. It went on to state that any future violations would result in escalating fines of $1,000 per incident and potential legal action to force compliance or remove me from the community. $500 for clearing my own driveway. I felt my blood pressure rising as I read through the formal language, all signed by Patricia Davidson in her flowing script with HOA President underlined twice. The next morning, I called the HOA management company that handled the administrative work for Meadowbrook Hills. A bored-sounding woman named Jennifer answered and listened to my complaint with the enthusiasm of someone reading a phone book. "Sir, if the HOA president has issued a fine, there is a formal appeals process. You need to submit a written appeal within 14 days, and it will be reviewed by the HOA board at their next monthly meeting. The board will vote on whether to uphold or dismiss the fine." The board that Patricia Davidson is the president of, the board where she hand-picked every member. "Sir, I just handle the paperwork. If you want to appeal, I can email you the forms." I requested the forms and spent that evening drafting my appeal. I included my credentials as a licensed pyrotechnics expert for Jefferson County, a letter from the fire chief confirming that my snow removal method was safe when performed by trained professionals, and photographs showing the proper safety measures I had taken. I cited the specific sections of the HOA regulations that Patricia had misinterpreted and provided evidence that propane torches were commonly used for ice removal in commercial and professional settings. 2 days later, I received an email from Jennifer stating that my appeal had been received and would be reviewed at the next board meeting on March 15th. That was 3 weeks away. The email also stated that the fine was still due immediately, and that failure to pay would result in additional late fees and potential legal action. I was not paying $500 for something I had every right to do. I called my insurance agent to make sure my homeowner policy was up to date, and then called a lawyer friend of mine who specialized in property law. His name was Marcus, and we had known each other since college. "HOA disputes are tricky," Marcus said over the phone. "Technically, when you bought your house, you signed the HOA agreement, which means you agreed to abide by their rules, even if those rules are ridiculous. But they also have to follow their own rules and apply them fairly. If you can prove that what you did was not actually a violation, or that they are selectively enforcing rules against you, you might have a case. So I should just pay the fine, not necessarily. Go to the meeting, present your case, and see what happens." If they rule against you, then we can talk about your options. But HOA litigation is expensive and time-consuming. Sometimes it is easier to just pay the fine and move on. It is not about the money, Marcus. It is about Patricia Davidson thinking she can bully people into doing whatever she wants. I hear you, man. Just be careful. HOAs have a lot of legal power, and they can make your life miserable if they want to. The next 3 weeks passed slowly. I made sure to follow every single HOA rule to the letter. My garbage cans were put out exactly 18 hours before pickup and brought in within 6 hours after. My lawn was meticulously maintained, even though most of it was still covered in snow. I made sure my car was parked perfectly within my driveway lines and that no equipment or materials were visible from the street. On March 10th, 5 days before the board meeting, it snowed again. Another 8 inches overnight, with a layer of ice underneath. I woke up at 5 in the morning, staring at my snow-covered driveway and the propane torch in my garage. I had another county meeting at 9, this time about the safety protocols for a spring concert series. I grabbed a shovel instead. It took me 3 hours to clear the driveway, and I was 40 minutes late to the meeting. My back ached for the next 2 days, but I did not give Patricia any ammunition to use against me. The HOA board meeting was held in the Meadowbrook Hills Community Center, a small building near the neighborhood entrance that was mostly used for garage sales and holiday parties. I arrived 15 minutes early, carrying a folder with all my documentation. There were about a dozen other residents there, most of them with their own complaints and issues to bring before the board. Patricia sat at the front table with 4 other board members. There was Richard, a retired accountant who always agreed with everything Patricia said. There was Susan, a real estate agent who seemed more interested in checking her phone than paying attention. There was Tom, who owned a landscaping company and had gotten the contract to maintain all the common areas in the neighborhood. And there was Brenda, who had lived in Meadowbrook Hills longer than anyone else and seemed to genuinely care about the community, even if she rarely spoke up against Patricia. The meeting started with standard business, reviewing the budget, discussing upcoming maintenance projects, and addressing a complaint about someone's fence being 3 inches too tall according to the regulations. Everything Patricia said was met with nodding agreement from Richard and Tom, occasional acknowledgement from Susan, and silence from Brenda. After 45 minutes of tedious discussion, Patricia finally called my name. Next, we have an appeal from Isaac Jameson regarding a fine issued on February 4th for reckless endangerment of community property. Mr. Jameson, you have 5 minutes to present your case. I stood up and walked to the front, opening my folder. Thank you. On the morning of February 4th, I was using a propane torch to remove ice from my driveway before going to a work meeting. This is a common and safe practice when performed by trained professionals, which I am. I have been a licensed pyrotechnics expert for Jefferson County for 15 years, and I work directly with the fire department on major events throughout the year. I handed out copies of my credentials and the letter from the fire chief. Patricia barely glanced at them before setting them aside. Richard and Tom did not even look. Susan glanced at her phone. Brenda actually read through the documents carefully. I was issued a fine for violating Section 47, subsection C of the HOA regulations, which deals with the storage of hazardous materials. I was not storing anything. I was performing routine property maintenance using professional equipment in a safe and controlled manner. I had safety gear, a fire extinguisher, and full knowledge of proper procedures. At no time was anyone in danger, and there was no damage to any property. I am asking that this fine be dismissed, as it was issued in error based on a misinterpretation of the HOA regulations." I sat back down. Patricia did not even wait for questions from the other board members before speaking. "Thank you for your presentation, Mr. Jameson. However, your credentials and professional experience do not change the fact that using a torch of any kind in a residential setting creates a perception of danger that negatively impacts our community. Even if you personally know what you are doing, other residents do not, and seeing someone using fire equipment in their driveway sets a bad precedent and could inspire others to attempt similar activities without proper training. The fine was issued not just for the immediate safety concern, but for the impact on community standards and property values. The board will now vote on whether to uphold or dismiss this fine." "Wait," I said, standing back up. "You are changing the reason for the fine." The letter said I violated safety protocols, not community standards, and there is nothing in the HOA regulations about perception of danger or setting precedents. You cannot just make up new rules to justify a fine after the fact. Patricia's face reddened. "Mr. Jameson, you are out of order." The board will now vote. All in favor of upholding the $500 fine. Richard and Tom immediately raised their hands. Susan looked up from her phone, seemed confused about what was happening, and then raised her hand as well. Patricia raised her own hand. That was 4 votes. "All opposed?" Patricia asked, her tone making it clear that opposition was not welcome. Brenda slowly raised her hand. "I think he has a point about the safety credentials, and I do not see how this actually violated our regulations." 4-1, the fine is upheld, Patricia said quickly, moving right along to the next agenda item. "Mr. Jameson, your payment is now overdue. You have 7 days to pay the fine plus a $50 late fee for a total of $550, or we will proceed with legal action." I felt my face getting hot. This is ridiculous. You did not even consider the evidence. You made up your mind before I even walked into this room. Mr. Jameson, if you continue to disrupt this meeting, I will have you removed from the premises. You have been given a fair hearing and the board has made its decision. If you wish to pursue further legal action, that is your right, but the fine stands. I grabbed my folder and walked out before I said something I would regret. Behind me, I could hear Patricia continuing with the meeting as if nothing had happened, her voice dripping with false sweetness as she addressed the next resident's concern about parking. I sat in my truck for 10 minutes, trying to calm down. Then I called Marcus. "They did not even look at the evidence," I said, explaining what had happened. "They completely changed the reason for the fine in the middle of the meeting and Patricia railroaded the vote. What are my options?" Marcus sighed. "Okay, so here is the thing. You can sue the HOA for improper enforcement and selective application of rules. But that is going to cost you several $1,000s in legal fees, and it could take months or even years to resolve. Or you can pay the $550 and move on with your life. I am not rewarding her for this behavior. I get it, Isaac, I really do, but you have to pick your battles. Is this really worth the time, money, and stress of a legal fight? I thought about it for a long moment. What if I just do not pay? What can they actually do? They can put a lien on your house. They can take you to court and potentially force a sale to collect the debt. HOAs have a lot of power when it comes to enforcing their rules. I have seen people lose their homes over unpaid HOA fines. It is not common, but it can happen. That is insane. It is legal. You signed the HOA agreement when you bought the house. That is a legally binding contract. I ended the call feeling defeated. $550 to a bully with a title, but Marcus was right. Fighting this in court would cost me far more than that. not just in money but in time and energy. I had a job that required focus and precision. I could not afford to be distracted by a legal battle with my HOA. That weekend, I wrote the check. It felt like swallowing glass as I dropped it in the mailbox, but I did it. I told myself that at least it was over and I could move on. I was wrong. 2 weeks later, it snowed again. This time just 4 inches, but it came overnight on a Thursday, and I had to be at the county municipal building by 8 for a safety inspection of our equipment storage facility. I looked at the snow, looked at my shovel, and looked at the propane torch in the garage. I grabbed the shovel. My back still hurt from last time, but I was not going through that board meeting circus again. It took me 90 minutes to clear the driveway, and I was sweating and sore by the time I finished. I made it to the inspection 5 minutes late, and the county inspector was not happy about it. "Isaac, you are never late. Is everything okay?" he asked. I explained the HOA situation, expecting sympathy or at least understanding. Instead, he looked confused. "Wait, you got fined for using a propane torch to clear ice. You, the guy who handles explosives for our major county events. The guy who literally has every safety certification we offer." "Yep, $500 plus a $50 late fee because I tried to appeal it." He shook his head. "That is the dumbest thing I have heard all week. You know the fire chief would back you up on this, right?" "Hell, half the fire department uses the same method at their own houses. It is completely safe when you know what you are doing." I had a letter from the fire chief in my appeal. The HOA board did not care. Man, I do not miss having an HOA. I live out in the county specifically, so I do not have to deal with that nonsense. You want me to talk to them? Official capacity, fire safety expert, that kind of thing? I appreciate it, but I already paid the fine. I just want to move on. But moving on was not as easy as I hoped. Patricia had gotten a taste of power, and she was not satisfied with just one fine. In April, I received a notice that my front lawn had weeds that exceeded the acceptable height as defined by Section 23 of the HOA regulations. The weeds in question were dandelions, barely 2 inches tall, scattered across my lawn just like everyone else's lawns in the neighborhood. The fine was $250 if not corrected within 48 hours. I spent an evening pulling dandelions while watching Patricia's own lawn, which had just as many if not more. I took photographs of her lawn and of several other neighbors' lawns, all with similar or worse dandelion coverage. I submitted them to the HOA management company, along with a complaint about selective enforcement. Jennifer from the management company called me back. "Mr. Jameson, the HOA president has discretion in determining what constitutes a violation. If she believes your lawn needed attention, then that is sufficient grounds for the notice. However, since you corrected the issue within the specified time frame, no fine has been issued. But she has more dandelions than I did. So do the Hendersons and the Martins, and at least 6 other houses on my street alone. Why am I the only one getting notices? I cannot speak to the HOA president's enforcement decisions, sir. If you believe you are being unfairly targeted, you can bring it up at the next board meeting." Right, the board that is run by Patricia and votes for whatever she wants. That is really going to help. Jennifer did not have an answer for that. In May, I received a notice that my garbage cans were visible from the street outside of the acceptable time frame. They were not. I had security cameras installed after the first fine, partially for home security, but mostly to document any future HOA disputes. The footage clearly showed that I had put the cans out 18 hours before pickup, exactly as required, and brought them back in 4 hours after pickup, well within the 6-hour window. I submitted the footage to the management company. The notice was quietly withdrawn without explanation or apology. In June, I received a notice that my house needed repainting because the color was fading and no longer met community standards. My house had been painted 3 years ago and looked exactly the same as it did when I bought it 5 years ago. The paint was in good condition. No fading, no peeling, nothing wrong with it at all. The notice stated that if I did not repaint within 30 days using an approved color from the HOA color palette, I would be fined $1,000. That was when I finally had enough. I called Marcus again. She is harassing me. This has nothing to do with actual violations or community standards. Patricia is targeting me because I stood up to her, and she is trying to make my life miserable until I either give up or move out. Marcus was quiet for a moment. Okay, I think we might actually have a case now. This is not just one disputed fine anymore. This is a pattern of selective enforcement and harassment. Save every notice, every email, every piece of communication with the HOA. Document everything. If she keeps this up, we can build a case for legal action against her and the HOA board for abusing their authority. How much is that going to cost me? For a case like this, probably $5,000 to $10,000 in legal fees, assuming it does not go to trial. If it goes to trial, could be a lot more. But if we win, the HOA would have to pay your legal fees and possibly damages. And if we lose, then you are out the legal fees and you still have to deal with the HOA. But based on what you are telling me, I think we have a strong case. I thought about it. $10,000 was a lot of money. But so was repainting my entire house for no reason other than Patricia's vendetta against me. And what would she come up with next? At some point, I had to stand up for myself, or she would never stop. Let me think about it. In the meantime, what should I do about the repainting notice? Take lots of photographs of your house and of similar houses in the neighborhood. Document that your paint is in good condition and consistent with other homes. Then submit a formal response to the HOA stating that you believe the notice is baseless and that you will not be complying. That forces them to either back down or take enforcement action, which gives us more evidence of harassment if they proceed. I followed Marcus's advice. I spent a day photographing my house and dozens of other houses in Meadowbrook Hills. My paint was actually in better condition than many of them. Some of the older homes had visible fading and peeling that made my house look freshly painted by comparison. I submitted my response to the HOA management company, along with the photographs and a detailed explanation of why the repainting notice was baseless and appeared to be targeted harassment. I cited specific examples of other homes with worse paint conditions that had not received notices. I stated that I would not be repainting my house, and that any fines issued would be contested through legal means. Patricia's response came within 24 hours. A certified letter informing me that my response was insufficient, that the repainting requirement stood, and that failure to comply would result in a $1,000 fine plus additional fines of $500 per week until the house was repainted to acceptable standards. The letter also stated that continued resistance to HOA regulations could result in legal action to force compliance or place a lien on my property. I forwarded everything to Marcus. He called me that evening. Okay, this is good. I mean, it is terrible for you, but it is good for building our case. She is way overstepping her authority here, and the threat of escalating weekly fines is going to look really bad in front of a judge. Here is what we are going to do. We are going to file a lawsuit against Patricia Davidson and the Meadowbrook Hills HOA board for harassment, abuse of power, and selective enforcement of regulations. We are going to seek an injunction to stop them from issuing any more fines while the case is being heard, and we are going to ask for damages to cover your previous fines, legal fees, and compensation for the harassment. This is going to take several months to play out, but I think we have a strong case. What do I need to do? Keep documenting everything. Do not pay the new fine. Do not repaint your house. Keep living your life normally and following all the legitimate HOA rules. If Patricia issues any more notices or fines, send them to me immediately. We want to show a clear pattern of harassment and abuse of power. The lawsuit was filed on June 18th. Patricia received her notification on June 20th. I know the exact day because that was the day I came home from work to find a deadbolt lock installed on the community pool gate with a new sign that read, "Pool access restricted pending resolution of delinquent accounts." I was the only resident in Meadowbrook Hills with a delinquent account since I had not paid the repainting fine. Patricia had locked me out of the community pool that my HOA fees paid for. I took photographs and called Marcus. He actually laughed. "Oh, she is making this so easy for us." You cannot restrict someone's access to community amenities because they are disputing a fine. That is against Colorado HOA law. This is going to look so bad for her in court. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for July 23rd. In the meantime, Patricia seemed determined to dig herself deeper into the hole. I received notices about my mailbox being the wrong shade of black. My doormat was apparently too large according to Section 18, subsection F, which I could not find anywhere in the actual HOA regulations. My truck was parked aggressively in my driveway, whatever that meant. I ignored all of them and forwarded everything to Marcus. Each notice was another nail in Patricia's coffin, more evidence of her harassment and abuse of power. On July 4th, I was working the county Independence Day celebration, the biggest event of my year. We had a 40-minute fireworks show coordinated with a live orchestra, plus drone light displays and pyrotechnics special effects. It was the culmination of months of planning and preparation. 55,000 people attended, and the show went off without a single problem. The county commissioners personally thanked me, and the local news did a segment about the amazing fireworks display. I got home at midnight, exhausted but satisfied, to find a notice on my door. Patricia had issued a $250 fine because my truck had been parked in my driveway for more than 24 consecutive hours on July 3rd and 4th, which apparently violated a regulation about long-term street parking. Except my truck was not on the street. It was in my driveway, on my property. I took a photograph of the notice, took a photograph of my security camera footage showing my truck clearly in the driveway, and went to bed. Marcus was going to love this one. The preliminary hearing was held in Jefferson County District Court in Golden, Colorado. Marcus had filed for an emergency injunction to stop the HOA from issuing any more fines or taking any enforcement action against me while the case was being heard. Judge William Patterson was presiding, a no-nonsense former prosecutor who did not have much patience for legal games. The HOA had hired their own lawyer, a stern woman named Michelle who specialized in HOA defense. She argued that I had violated multiple HOA regulations, that the fines were legitimate enforcement actions, and that the HOA had full authority under Colorado law to manage and enforce community standards. Marcus presented our evidence: the initial torch fine based on misinterpretation of regulations, my professional credentials that were ignored, the pattern of selective enforcement, the escalating notices and fines for increasingly trivial or non-existent violations, and finally the restriction of my pool access, which was illegal under state law. Judge Patterson looked through the documentation, his expression growing increasingly skeptical. He asked Michelle to explain why other homes with similar or worse issues had not received notices. She claimed that the HOA president had discretion in enforcement priorities. He asked her to justify the repainting requirement for a house that was clearly in good condition. She argued that maintaining high standards was essential for property values. Then he asked her to explain the pool access restriction. She hesitated before claiming it was standard practice for delinquent accounts. Judge Patterson cut her off. Counsel, Colorado Revised Statutes Section 3833.3316 clearly states that an HOA cannot restrict an owner's access to common amenities for non-payment of fines without going through proper legal channels, which includes obtaining a judgment and following collection procedures. This appears to be a clear violation of that statute. Does your client have a judgment against Mr. Jameson? Michelle shuffled papers. Your Honor, the fines were properly issued according to HOA procedures. Mr. Jameson refused to pay, which constitutes a delinquent account. That is not what I asked. Do you have a judgment? No, Your Honor. Then your client violated state law by restricting his access to the pool. That alone is sufficient for me to grant the injunction. But looking at the pattern of enforcement here, it is clear to me that Mr. Jameson has a strong case for selective enforcement and harassment. The initial fine was issued for an activity that was demonstrably safe when performed by a licensed professional. Subsequent notices appear to be retaliatory and based on increasingly questionable interpretations of HOA regulations. I am granting the injunction. The HOA is prohibited from issuing any new fines or enforcement actions against Mr. Jameson until this case is fully adjudicated. All existing disputed fines are placed on hold. Mr. Jameson's access to community amenities is to be restored immediately. The full trial is scheduled for September 12th. We are adjourned. I felt a weight lift off my shoulders as we left the courtroom. Marcus was grinning. That went even better than I hoped. Patterson basically telegraphed that he thinks you have a strong case. The HOA is going to be in serious trouble if we go to trial. So, what happens now? Now we wait for September and see if the HOA wants to settle. After that hearing, I would be surprised if they did not try to negotiate. Fighting this in trial is going to be expensive for them, and they are facing not just losing the case, but potentially paying damages and your legal fees. Plus, there could be personal liability for Patricia if we can prove she knowingly abused her authority. I went home, and for the first time in months, I slept well. The next morning, I received an email from Jennifer at the management company. The pool lock had been removed, and all enforcement actions against my property had been suspended pending resolution of the legal case. But Patricia was not done yet. She could not issue official HOA notices or fines because of the injunction, but there was nothing stopping her from making my life difficult in other ways. She organized a neighborhood petition to have me removed from the community for creating a hostile environment and damaging neighborhood unity. She posted in the Meadowbrook Hills Facebook group about how I was costing the HOA thousands of dollars in legal fees because I refused to follow simple rules. She started parking her own car on the street directly in front of my house, technically legal but clearly intended to annoy me. I ignored it all. Marcus had advised me not to engage with Patricia in any way that was not through official legal channels. Anything I said or did could potentially be used against me in court. So I went to work. I came home. I maintained my property, and I documented everything Patricia did. In August, Marcus received a settlement offer from the HOA's lawyer. They would drop all fines, pay $5,000 toward my legal fees, and agree not to take any enforcement action against my property for 1 year. In exchange, I would drop the lawsuit and agree not to use the propane torch for snow removal in the future. I told Marcus to reject it. This was not about the money anymore. This was about making sure Patricia could not do this to anyone else. If we settled, she would just find a new target and start the whole process over again with someone who might not have the resources or knowledge to fight back. Marcus warned me that going to trial was risky. Even with a strong case, there was always a chance we could lose. And trial meant more legal fees, more time, more stress. But he agreed that settling would not actually solve the underlying problem. The case went to trial on September 12th. It lasted 3 days. We presented all our evidence. The initial fine based on misinterpretation of regulations, my professional credentials, the pattern of selective enforcement, the photographs showing my property was being held to different standards than others, the illegal pool restriction, and the escalating harassment after I filed the lawsuit. We also called witnesses. The county fire chief testified that my use of a propane torch was safe and appropriate given my professional credentials. Brenda from the HOA board testified that Patricia had decided to fine me before the appeal hearing even started, and that she had expressed frustration multiple times that I was not falling in line with her authority. The county inspector testified about my professional reputation and the absurdity of fining a licensed pyrotechnics expert for safely using a propane torch. The HOA's defense was weak. Michelle tried to argue that the HOA had broad authority to interpret and enforce regulations, but she could not explain why that authority was only being exercised against me. She claimed that my use of the torch, regardless of my credentials, set a bad example for the community, but she could not cite any actual complaints from neighbors or any evidence of anyone trying to copy what I did. She argued that the HOA was simply maintaining high standards, but the photographs of other properties made it clear that those standards were only being applied to me. Patricia testified in her own defense, which was a mistake. Under cross-examination from Marcus, she became defensive and hostile. She admitted that she thought my use of the torch was showing off, and that I needed to be put in my place. She claimed that I had an attitude problem and was not a good fit for the Meadowbrook Hills community. She said that she had a responsibility to maintain order, and that sometimes that meant taking a firm hand with residents who did not want to cooperate. Marcus asked her directly if she had issued the repainting notice as retaliation for me fighting the initial fine. She denied it, but the timeline spoke for itself. She had not noticed any problem with my paint job for 5 years, but suddenly, it was a critical issue 2 months after I appealed the torch fine. Judge Patterson took 1 day to issue his ruling. He found in my favor on every count. The initial fine was determined to be baseless and issued in error. The subsequent notices and fines were determined to be selective enforcement and harassment. Patricia's actions were found to be an abuse of her authority as HOA president. The pool restriction was found to be in violation of Colorado state law. The judge ordered the HOA to refund my $550 from the initial fine, plus interest. He awarded me $15,000 in legal fees and $8,000 in damages for harassment and stress. He also ordered that Patricia Davidson be removed from her position as HOA president and be prohibited from serving in any HOA leadership role for Meadowbrook Hills for a period of 5 years. But the judge was not done. He also ordered an investigation into whether Patricia had violated Colorado statutes regarding HOA governance and fiduciary duty. If the investigation found evidence of criminal misconduct, the matter would be referred to the district attorney's office for potential prosecution. The courtroom was silent as Judge Patterson read his ruling. Patricia's face went from red to white. Michelle looked like she had been punched in the stomach. Marcus was trying not to grin too widely, and I just felt relieved that it was finally over, or so I thought. 2 weeks later, I received a call from a detective with the Jefferson County Sheriff's Office. Detective Sarah Morrison asked if I would be willing to come in and answer some questions about the Meadowbrook Hills HOA finances. I agreed and met with her the following day. She explained that during the court-ordered investigation into Patricia's conduct, auditors had discovered significant discrepancies in the HOA's financial records. Over the past 3 years, approximately $63,000 in HOA funds could not be accounted for. Deposits were missing documentation. Expenses were vaguely described or not documented at all. The HOA's reserve fund, which should have had over $100,000 for major repairs and maintenance, had less than $40,000. Patricia had been the HOA treasurer before becoming president, and she had maintained control of the finances even after supposedly handing that role to Richard. Every check required 2 signatures, hers and one board member, but the board members had apparently been signing blank checks and letting Patricia fill in the details later. "We are building a case for embezzlement and theft," Detective Morrison said. "This goes beyond civil HOA disputes. This is criminal fraud. We are interviewing all the residents to see if anyone noticed anything suspicious or can provide information about HOA expenditures that do not match the financial records." I told her everything I knew, which was not much. I had paid my HOA fees every month like everyone else, and had assumed the money was being used for community maintenance, insurance, and reserves. I had not paid close attention to the financial reports that went out with the monthly newsletters because they had always seemed routine. Over the next few months, the investigation expanded. Forensic accountants went through every HOA transaction for the past 5 years. They discovered that Patricia had been writing checks to herself and to shell companies she controlled for consulting fees and special projects that had never actually happened. She had been taking cash advances against the HOA's credit card for emergency repairs that were never documented or completed. She had been systematically stealing from the HOA since she became treasurer, and the theft had accelerated after she became president and had even more control. In January, Patricia Davidson was arrested and charged with 11 counts of theft, 6 counts of embezzlement, 4 counts of forgery, and 2 counts of fraud. The total amount she had stolen was calculated at just over $78,000. If convicted on all counts, she was looking at up to 20 years in prison and hundreds of thousands in fines and restitution. The other board members were not charged criminally, but they were removed from the board and faced civil liability for failing in their fiduciary duties. New board elections were held, and the HOA hired a professional management company to handle all financial matters going forward. The neighborhood was in shock. Most people had no idea what Patricia had been doing. Some residents were angry that they had been stolen from. Others were embarrassed that they had not noticed. A few tried to defend Patricia, claiming she had been under a lot of stress and made mistakes, but the evidence was overwhelming. This was not mistakes. This was deliberate, systematic theft over many years. Patricia's trial was scheduled for May, but she accepted a plea deal in April. She pleaded guilty to 6 counts of theft and 3 counts of embezzlement in exchange for the other charges being dismissed. She was sentenced to 8 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 5 years. She was ordered to pay full restitution of $78,000 to the HOA, plus interest and penalties. Her house was sold to cover part of the restitution, and she would be making payments for the rest of her life. I attended the sentencing hearing. I wanted to see it through to the end. Patricia looked smaller somehow, diminished without her authority and power. She made a brief statement apologizing to the community and claiming she had gotten in over her head with personal financial problems and made bad decisions. She did not apologize to me specifically, and I did not expect her to. When it was over, I walked out of the courthouse into a beautiful spring afternoon. Marcus met me on the steps. "So, how does it feel?" he asked. "Honestly, I just feel tired. I never wanted any of this. I just wanted to clear my driveway and get to work." "Yeah, but you did more than that. You stood up to a bully and you exposed a criminal. Because you did not back down, the whole neighborhood got justice. A lot of people would have just paid the fine and moved on. I am stubborn like that. It is a good quality sometimes." We walked to our cars together. The neighborhood was already changing. The new HOA board was focused on actual community maintenance and improvement rather than petty enforcement of arbitrary rules. They had repealed some of the more ridiculous regulations and clarified others. They had established proper financial oversight and transparency, and they had made it clear that selective enforcement and harassment would not be tolerated. I still lived in Meadowbrook Hills. I still paid my HOA fees, though they had gone up slightly to rebuild the reserve fund that Patricia had stolen. I still worked as a pyrotechnics expert for Jefferson County, coordinating fireworks shows and special effects for major events. And when it snowed, I used my propane torch to clear my driveway. Nobody said a word about it. In fact, a few neighbors had asked me about the technique, and I had shown them how to do it safely. One had even hired me to clear his driveway when he threw his back out shoveling. I charged him a 6-pack of beer, and the satisfaction of knowing that Patricia's attempt to control me had completely backfired. Life had a funny way of working out sometimes. I had been fined for doing something completely safe and reasonable by someone who thought their title gave them unlimited power. That fine had led to an investigation that exposed years of criminal activity and got a corrupt HOA president sent to prison. It had cost me time, stress, and money, but in the end, justice had been served. I thought about Patricia sometimes, sitting in prison, probably still convinced that she had done nothing wrong and that I was somehow the villain in this story. But I did not lose any sleep over it. I had followed the rules, stood up for myself, and let the legal system do its job. Everything that happened to Patricia was the result of her own choices and actions. One Saturday morning in late June, I was sitting on my front porch drinking coffee when Brenda walked by with her dog. She waved and came up the walkway. "Good morning, Isaac. I just wanted to thank you again for everything you did. I know it was not easy, and I am sorry I did not speak up more during those board meetings. Patricia could be very intimidating, and I regret not standing up to her sooner. You voted against the fine. That took courage." Not enough courage, apparently, but the new board is so much better. We actually talk about things and listen to each other, and we are focused on maintaining the community, not harassing residents. It is what an HOA should be. I am glad to hear it. Also, I wanted to let you know that the board voted to officially recognize you for your service to the county and the community. We are putting up a plaque at the community center acknowledging your work as our resident pyrotechnics expert. We figured if we are going to have someone with your credentials living here, we should celebrate it rather than fine you for it. I was genuinely touched. "Thank you, Brenda. That means a lot." She smiled and continued her walk. I sat there sipping my coffee, looking out at the quiet suburban street. Kids were riding bikes. Someone was washing their car. A lawn mower hummed in the distance. Just a normal Saturday in a normal neighborhood, and that was all I had ever wanted. To live my life, do my job, and be left alone to clear my driveway however I wanted. It had taken a year-long legal battle and the exposure of a criminal conspiracy to get there, but I had finally found peace in Meadowbrook Hills. The following winter, we had a major blizzard. 26 inches of snow in 36 hours, one of the biggest storms in Colorado history. The entire neighborhood was buried. I got up early, grabbed my propane torch and started clearing my driveway. Within an hour, 5 neighbors had come over asking for help. I spent the day going from house to house, showing people the proper technique, lending equipment, and helping clear driveways for elderly residents who could not do it themselves. By evening, half the neighborhood was cleared, and people were posting in the community Facebook group about how lucky we were to have someone with professional snow removal expertise living in Meadowbrook Hills. The new HOA president, a retired engineer named Paul, sent me an email thanking me for helping the community and asking if I would be willing to do a spring workshop on fire safety and proper use of propane equipment for residents who were interested in learning. I agreed, and we held the workshop in April. 23 people attended, and everyone walked away with a better understanding of how to safely use fire-based tools for various home maintenance tasks. It was a far cry from being fined $500 for the exact same activity. But that was the difference between an HOA that served the community and an HOA that was run by someone on a power trip. I was grateful that Meadowbrook Hills had learned that lesson, even though the education had been expensive and painful. Years later, I still lived in that house. I had thought about moving after everything with Patricia, but I realized that would be letting her win in a way. She had wanted me gone, and I had refused to leave. This was my home, my community, and I had earned my place here through patience, documentation, and a refusal to be bullied. The propane torch still hung in my garage, right next to the shovel I no longer needed. Every winter, when the snow fell, I would pull it out and clear my driveway in minutes instead of hours. And every time I did, I thought about that February morning when Patricia had come marching across the street in her bathrobe and fuzzy slippers, thinking she could intimidate me into submission. She had learned the hard way that titles and authority meant nothing without integrity and respect. And I had learned that standing up for yourself, even when it was difficult and expensive, was always worth it in the end. The snow continued to fall on Meadowbrook Hills, just like it always had. But now I could clear it however I wanted, using my professional expertise and equipment without fear of harassment or unjust fines. And that simple freedom, the ability to maintain my own property in the way I saw fit, was something I would never take for granted again. Life was good. The HOA was functional and fair. Patricia was in prison where she belonged, and I was still here, still working, still setting off fireworks for county celebrations, and still clearing my driveway with a propane torch whenever it snowed. Some battles were worth fighting, even if you never expected to find yourself in them. Some bullies needed to be stood up to, even if it cost you time and money and stress. And some stories needed to end with justice being served and the good guys winning. This was one of those stories. And standing on my porch on a quiet summer evening, looking out at the neighborhood that had been through so much and come out better for it, I could finally say that it had all been worth it. The torch incident that started everything had led to the exposure of a criminal, the reform of a corrupt HOA, and the creation of a stronger, more transparent community. All because I refused to accept an unjust fine and had the resources and stubbornness to fight back. I raised my coffee cup in a silent toast to persistence, justice, and the simple satisfaction of being proven right. Then I went inside to plan the county's 4th of July celebration, because some traditions were worth keeping, and making things explode beautifully in the sky was still my favorite way to earn a living. The end.